Subscribe and click the bell icon for the latest updates and notifications from the Indian Express.
Last 2.5+ years you have been with NSDC. Has there been a change in the skilling program itself? Because I think there were some after you came in, or probably a little before that, there were about how to fund this program. There were some changes in that. Uh, there were links also to performance, whether people are getting jobs. So would you like to?
Yeah, so I think on the change side, skill is some kind of environment which has been maturing in a way. So if we look at skill from the perspective of past, and you look at it from, let's say, 1951, you had ITIs. That was a skill. We had that going, but it was somewhere around 2008-9. It got into a different mold when you had NSDC also being created, private sector being drawn into skilling in a bigger way. So change has been there, always there, and after I have come in, there has been changes too. On the financing side, I think one major difference which has occurred over time, or particularly from 2009 to maybe 2000, let's say 15, around that is that while initially there were expectation of a lot of private sector investments, actually government investments has increased, not decreased. So we had therefore two types of models. One is what we call the fee-based model, where we expect to create a center, and that is run by candidates who pay fee on their own for taking that particular course. So they're paying for it, so the willingness to pay for that particular service. When the government comes in with public money, then obviously for the courses that they come in, the willingness to pay will decline for that, because there is an alternative source of income, or rather financing, which is cheaper. So that was, I think, one major change, but that occurred on certain layers of the job market, or rather I would say the skill market. One of the debate that often occurs is, should skill be funded by government at all? People often say that it should not be done by government, it should be done by private. However, I think global experience shows that skill is a case of market failure. A private sector does not like to skill a person because of the fear that the person will be poached the moment it becomes a public knowledge. To the government, it doesn't matter that after skilling, whether that person remains with this company or that company, whichever company it is, if it contributes to national GDP, then the country gains.
One critical narrative which has sparked a lot of debate and discussion is on jobs, particularly post demonetization. I think in the informal sector, unorganized sector, there have been huge loss of jobs. Probably many of which have not been able to even stand up after the withdrawal of currency. The other thing is about private sector investment itself, which has not really picked up in the last 4 years. So there have been not much of job creation, and government jobs are hard to come by with the ratio of those who apply, excess of even hundreds. So, what has been your sense, given the large scale skill program of the government of India, whether it has led to jobs, and whether there are any numbers that you can talk about in terms of what has skilling created in the last 4.5 years?
So I think skill directly resulting in job, I don't see that happening directly. I mean, the skill is something which contributes to job. I mean, if there is a job there, a skilled person goes, productivity increases, and you generally tend to fill up job roles more frequently if you have more skilled people. So that's how I look at it. So in terms of causality, or the direction of causality. But I think coming back to your main issue of the jobs itself, and we have done some analytics to understand uh, what is the reality, or what might we perceive as the situation. Because for us, we are creating people who we believe should be in jobs eventually, or self-employed, either way. So I think what we have done, we took a very unusual method of trying to estimate that what might be the potential for job. We're not saying this is job, but I'm saying the potential for job. Given the investments that has been made, over last 10 years. We took 10 years. So what we did is we went back using CMI data. Every investment which is above 1 crore that has occurred in any of the sector, and we have 26 sectors. I might have a book actually to say on that with you. Every investment which is above 1 crore, we took that and then tried to compare that with data on jobs, which includes informal jobs, including 2011 census, and then using regression methodology, trying to predict future using that, so systematically, and then testing it backward again. So there were several reiterations. So we found actually for our country, in 1 year, there was a potential to create 2.5 crore jobs, with the biggest job being created in logistics sector. The problem is not about jobs. The problem is actually about the problem is about the wages. That's what is our feeling about it. Why I'm saying this? I'm talking in a very historical sense, and this covers not just, I think, India, but globally. So if you read this book by book on rise of robots, I think is I'm forgetting the author's name. So he writes about a historical period starting from 1920 to 1985, where the rate of return to capital and rate of return to labor, if you draw a graph, both of them go up together. Essentially meaning that I put in money, I make money out of that, I give the labor some money, so his real wages increases, and then he puts in more effort next year. So both of us are actually gaining, and it's going up. 1985, a very unusual thing happens. You'll find suddenly the rate of return to capital has gone upwards, and the rate of return to labor has begun to flatten, essentially implying that the moment computers came in, I think our capacity to organize ourselves, and when internet came, our capacity to communicate, our capacity to organize, everything went, in a ballistically high trajectory. As a consequence of that, the return to capital increased extremely high. Obviously, the sharing didn't occur to that level because that was maybe very, very high. You find that flattening and actually coming down. So in some sense, the implication is that labor perhaps is not getting the wages that they deserve given the economy's rise. So more of, I think, sharing is necessary. Now, how do you share? Essentially, you will have to increase the minimum wage perhaps, or the private sector has to pay more. The private sector always has a fear that if they pay more, you are out of competition because you are competing globally. So I think that fear is genuine. So it's not an easy riddle to solve. We have done our randomized sample survey to understand how much does a new PMKVY candidate gets and what is his expectation from life. So we find that in average, they get about 9,000 rupee after they get employed, 9,000 rupee as wages. Expectation from life, like next 1 year or whatever, is about 19,000. So there is a huge mismatch. And therefore, he is not willing, the moment he is not willing to stay at one place. The moment you give him 1,000 rupee extra, he will quickly change jobs. He will try to stabilize only when he gets about 19,000.
So have you, checked that how many individuals have you skilled over maybe last 3-4 years, and is there any track record of how many of them got employed?
Yeah. So we have a database of about 1.9 crores since inception. In last 1 year, if I were to give a figure, I'm giving the last year's figure. We had actually skilled about 50 lakh people, approximately 49 point something, of which 25 lakh was through a fee-based model, and other 25 lakh was through what we call the PMKY model. So PMKY is the government grant model, and the fee-based is where people pay themselves or the corporates pay. It's market-driven. It's a little more market-driven. So in the case of market-driven, usually we have found there is a greater employment opportunity. In the other one, we have had a feeling that probably the reporting from the training partner has been about 50%. That's what they claim. We are still under the process of verification. Unlikely that it will be 50% in my view. We'll have to check a little more deeply because probably it will be slightly lower, because I have noticed through some of the impact evaluation that we have done, 30% of people who do PMKVY actually don't want to go for jobs. Why? Because they say that they are picking up this skill, they don't want to use it immediately. They have picked it up, but they say that this is for future, I want to study more. So probably improving educational system or educational capacity within the country is pulling in many youths.
Do you track people even after they get a job, or you stop tracking them?
So it's a very interesting one, because our idea would be to track them for 1 year. But of late, we have been in discussion with Kotak Bank. Kotak Bank is also working with RBI on what we call the blockchain technology. We're trying to see if we can use blockchain technology to actually track longer, because that will give us a longer panel kind of understanding, a little more nuanced understanding of what's really happening to an individual after he gets killed. So at the moment, we will have details about him. 1 year perhaps we will track him. But beyond that, I think we will require technology to go deeper. We are at work on that issue, but not there yet.
What is the average kind of hike or spike in salary that these people have after they're trained with you?
Yeah, this is very interesting. So we did an impact evaluation where we compared people who took no training but got employment. Same cohort in terms of, let's say, the local socioeconomic profile and all that, and those who got certified and then got skilled, got certified and then got a job. So we compare the salary of the two. So the difference comes to 1,000 rupee per month between the two, which is almost like 12,000 rupee per annum, which we thought was significant. It's almost like 15% of their salary being explained simply by the fact that they got 3 months skilling. Where some of our analytics and some data which we have collected shows that unlike the popular belief that only 7 or 8% of India is skilled, we find actually 42% of India is skilled. If you take it in terms of number of hours that you have spent doing a job, and therefore you are informally skilled, but there is nobody who has certified you as skilled. Those 7 to 8%, somebody has certified you, therefore you call yourself skilled. But there are others who are skilled, doing that work equally perhaps well or maybe better, but have not got a certification. So recognition of prior learning focuses on ensuring that these people get certification. In their case, interesting thing that we have observed, 47% of them come back to us saying that post the certification, they had an increase in their wages. And the most interesting thing is, lower is his educational qualification, higher is the jump in his wages. So it seems to benefit the people who are most underprivileged. So that's, I think, a very powerful one. Secondly, 63% of them come back, reported to us, saying that their respect in workplace increased tremendously after they were given this certification. So it becomes very clear that one is the bargaining power increases, because let's say your driver has a certificate which says that I'm a good driver, so he is able to bargain with you. Otherwise, he knows that if I am turned out, I don't know how will I get another job. So he's a little more insecure, and therefore giving that certification actually empowers him in a way to become a little more, I think, aggressive in terms of what to demand. But in a country the size of India, it's not easy to detect. When you just skill 2 crore people in a country of let's say 100 crores, 130 crores. So it will not seem immediately visible. You must at least reach, as I was saying, if we must reach at least 20% of that population to begin showing effect.
What are the top 3 skills which are in demand in the marketplace?
So the top one is logistics. Then we have retail and textiles. So these are the top 3 ones. Logistics and automotive, etc., is very, very high in demand. And we've looked at it also in terms of investments. The investments and its correlation to jobs that will be created. That's, I think, the highest in the country in our view. At one point of time, construction was very high. But I think this latest analytics doesn't show construction that high. It's there among the top 5, 7, but will not be like the top one, which it used to be maybe in 2013 when we did our last analytics. And the current one didn't show that.
This one is which year, this analytics?
This one is current year, 2018, last year.
Post-demo.
Yeah, 2018, we did it in 2018.
There are 2 kinds of partnerships you get into. One is where you provide skills to the existing manpower in a particular company. And second is where you leverage the experience of a company to offer particular skills. For example, the Facebook partnership that you got into for digital skills. But so a 2-part question, where you are training the existing manpower of the company, what kind of impact have we seen there on those workers in terms of wages or otherwise? And secondly, when you get into such agreements with companies, beyond say providing their experience, do they also absorb some of these skills within their company? And do we have a number to that?
See, we don't do any direct skilling in any company. We have training partners whom we motivate, I mean, either through financing or through knowledge. So we provide two things. Some people will provide both knowledge and financing, and they are the ones who create and they go and skill people. So we don't deal directly with the industry per se, excepting through the method of apprenticeship, which is relatively new. Something which we started maybe 6 months back. So therefore, I wouldn't have really data to answer the question that you asked in terms of productivity. So, but I think on the productivity part, I have not come across a study yet within India which has gone into details of how skilling is impacting productivity. And our request to some of the partners that we have, educational institutions like IIM Bangalore, Indian School of Business, etc., has been that can we do a productivity study, even for a sector, or if not for a sector, a geography or a cluster, to understand that how skill has led to some change in its productivity, because that argument is very critical for convincing the private sector to go for skilling in a bigger way. In many countries, actually, they do it that way. What they essentially do is they'll do maybe once in 2 years or 3 years a productivity study, through which they come to know that this particular sector, by how much did it grow. And then there is a tripartite meeting between the government, the private sector and the labor union, that how much of the gains would you like to share with the unions. So it's a very interesting bargaining which occurs, but that's based on evidence and that's useful, that kind of evidence. We are not yet in that culture, but we should move in that particular direction in long term.
Speaking about skills in the digital sector, also how automation could impact jobs going ahead. There have been particularly two schools of thought. One which says that automation is likely to take more jobs away, and the second one says that it's likely to create more jobs but in different areas. What do you think, and how ready are we to skill our youth to probably be in a situation where jobs are not impacted as badly?
So it's interesting that the jobs are getting lost or will be lost also in future, but there will be new jobs which will be created, and there will be far many more new jobs that will be created than that which will be lost. But the ones who will gain will be people perhaps at the lower income pyramid. So I'll give you an example. The driverless cars of California are actually run by girls living in Bhubaneswar. And these are mostly girls who are class 10 or 12 passed. Class 10 or 12 passed. Some villages outside Bhubaneswar who have been drafted by companies who come and sit before a computer screen, looking at a street in California, and then tagging that this is the median of the road, this is the curve of the road, this is the speed limit. So she gets a picture. Every 10 minutes she gets a new picture, and she tags that and then sends it off to the cloud. And there are hundreds of such girls sitting and tagging continuously. Anudip Foundation, if you would like to go and check. So I was actually amazed. So they have done that, and there are many such examples. So very interesting examples where we find that there are new types of jobs which will come out. So therefore, I think the worry is not so much about, I guess, jobs not being there at all. There will be jobs. But I think there will be losses of jobs, and how people will have to cope with that. So one thing which comes out very clearly is that we can't afford to have very long kind of trainings, which is 2 year, 1 year, 1.5 year, and then finding that another 1.5 year it is out of date. Now I think the whole concept is moving towards modular learning, that how can you make it a continuous learning and a modular learning.
So in some trades, like plumbing for instance, you have these informal credentials, Odisha plumber or some trained under Odisha plumber. So how well does, say, RPL compete with these sort of informal credentials or certifications that are already there in the market, which are very geographically specific?
Yeah. So I think the RPL and that has no conflict. We should actually make RPL more frequent, and that can become like our source from where we start the RPL. Because Odisha plumbers, if they are famous, then they are the ones we should give RPL first. They are the ones who will benefit the most out of it. So yeah, globally you'll find people do specialize. I mean, some places will be known for having good automotive sector, some others will be known for textiles. So that's I think normal. But I think we should not leave RPL merely because the branding is also coming through some other source. That branding plus RPL makes it much more powerful.
What has been the job scenario? Have they been employed? You said that it is less than 50% for the government funded ones.
Mhm.
Probably around.
Yeah.
What is it for the private sector?
It'll be
And
about,
what are the numbers like?
See, I not only have numbers, I'll have individuals and where they are, if you are interested. And it's there online. So I've ensured that it is online so that anybody can access it publicly in the website. So we just wanted to ensure that there is transparency on the data. So any training partner who is uploading documents is for every public. I mean, for anybody to know that okay, this person has got trained, this place is working here. So I think in terms of the people who might have paid fees and then got into skilling, they're the, as I was saying, it's almost like 60%. It's a little higher on that one. So it'll be a little higher than, yeah. But I can give you the details, and I can give you state-wise details if you want, so that, and sector-wise, because that sector-wise will be more interesting than state-wise.
Okay.
Some of the states obviously absorb more. Like for example, when I was telling 2.5 crore jobs, I got the breakdown. I have a breakdown of that potential for job creation district-wise. I've got the detail of it district-wise, and then I find that the largest potential is in Maharashtra. So that's the Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, all these, Karnataka, they have the largest potential. In terms of city, you'll find Bombay, then followed by Delhi, etc., Chennai, Bangalore. So, I mean, expected engines of growth. So you get fairly good amount of data. I think what two things which are necessary. One is probably looking at not just the job, but the quality of job, and the things which I was talking about. That are we really? I mean, are there really no jobs, or there are jobs which perhaps we could have made better by a bit of let's say formalization from our end.
And what has been your experience with the private sector? Are they really putting in that kind of say emphasis on skilling in the last say 3 years when the private sector has not been really growing in terms of their own capacity? Not investments not really happening much.
Yeah, so I think you see private sector, in my view, has had it's more of a passive kind of approach towards skills. So they're happy if you send them skilled people. Everybody will love skilled people. But are they actively seeking skilled people? I think some cases I would have noticed, but it's not as though I've seen government's interest in skilling people and ensuring much more than private sector's very active seeking of skilled people. Probably because, and this is often it's the market structure of India, in the sense that India is such a big market, such a huge market, that I could afford to have unskilled people in my company. And let's say that your company beats me in the market in Delhi. With that inefficient product that I have, I still have a market in Meerut. But if I was Finland with just 5 million people, essentially it means I have to cross the international border. So I'll really pay my guys well, because I need them to compete here. I can here actually still continue paying low because there is a bigger market. There's such a big market that I can afford level of inefficiency in a much deeper way. And I think that's also a challenge for us. So it's almost like a structure of our market, which is also not creating that much of pressure on the private sector to take skills in a much more. So I think the models, etc., that we use will have to be much more. I think we have to think of all these and put a model that encompasses these difficulties.
So in terms of regulatory changes, one was of course the Apprenticeship Act, which there were some changes to that and helped the skilling process. But do you feel the need for any regulatory changes?
I think one good change which is coming is the NCVET, National Council for Vocational Education Training. So this is coming because there was no centralized regulator earlier. quality control, etc. we were doing on behalf of MSD. I think it's important to have one credible body doing that and building that credibility bit by bit. So recently NCVT as a concept was, I think, cleared by the government. Is yet to take shape, in the sense that I think it will take another 6 months before it takes shape. So the expectation would be that this will send a signal to the market that there is a credible body which is concerned about quality and is going to look at both those who deliver skilling as well as the quality of people who come out of it.
For the theory to work with the new types of jobs that are created through automation, you would have to really invest in digital skilling so that the people who are losing jobs are being able to work in those new types of jobs. So what specific things are you doing so that the people who have lost jobs because of automation are not disproportionately hurt because of it and are able to take up those new types of jobs?
The digital changes or changes that's happening because of the life transforming technology of internet, that's something which is going to impact all sectors. So therefore we have created what we call qualification packs and national occupation standards, which cross cuts nearly all sectors. So we have NASSCOM has one small unit which is called ITES Sector Skill Council that works very closely with us, where essentially we are trying to in a way imagine that how might retail change, because there is a impact coming from IT system being changed or digital world getting changed. But there was one recent case, I think one year back or something, where apparently in one of the very big industrial group, 1/3 of the employees suddenly began to refuse their salary. And they were frightened because 1/3 of the employee not taking their salary implies there is a problem, brewing. So people began to investigate what's wrong. Then they found actually these employee IDs were for robots. They were not supposed to receive salary, but they had replaced other people. They were robots, but because the number was there, so people are counting salary against that. Now the challenge which became here is that for the HR person, he had been looking at the performance of those robots and then prescribing the requirement for normal ordinary person, how he should operate. So you are pushing too much of, you are expecting too much from individual if you are comparing him with someone who works 24 hours because he's a robot. So therefore the need for redrafting how you do HR in a world where there's a lot of these, lot of robots. So therefore this cross-cutting nature of QP and NOS, which I was talking of, is critical in many layers, and we have already begun working on that. So at least 30 of them we have created. We worked with the National University of Singapore for that purpose. We have also partnered through our BFSI, Banking and Financial Services Institute, Sector Skill Council, which is actually based in BSc in Bombay. So they have partnered with Imperial College London to understand what are the disrupting technologies that are occurring, which of these disrupting technologies will occur next year, and which are the ones which will occur in long term and not immediate.
Do you think it should be at the level of schools?
Yeah, so we work in schools also. We work in about 7,000 schools, impacting about 500,000 children. And I think school is the right path to start skilling, right stage to start skilling for several reasons. One is the aspirational value to skills, because usually, not just in India, but globally I have noticed, skill is often seen as to be done by somebody who could not do well in education. But I have found countries which don't think like that. So if you go to Finland, or for that matter, if you see Sweden, then they integrate schooling and skilling in such a way that you grow up and you realize, oh, you are a good carpenter, because in the process of your classes you find you are actually making good stuff and you're enjoying it. You simply grow up as a carpenter. You don't care what others think, because that's a very natural way of growing. But unfortunately, in our context, we grow with a certain mindset up to class 10, and then somebody tells you, okay, can you be a carpenter? And then your image of a carpenter is as though, just that typical, social value. And there are different types of carpenters. In fact, some of the carpentry is so good that any of us would like to work in those machines, but we have not seen them. So our perception of a carpenter would be a typical carpenter we have encountered, and we think that is not valuable. So in Haryana, we have actually adopted this model of Kunskapsskolan from Sweden, And we are introducing that in about 100 schools, where we are trying to merge schooling and skilling together in 100 private schools.
Private school.
No, sorry, government schools,
Government
not
schools.
private, government schools. So the idea would be to see how children react to that, and then if supposing there is positive on that Kunskapkulan model,
it's
maybe
not-
we'll expand.
So the example that you mentioned about carpentry and how certain trades are below a certain social value in us. But say over the past 5-10 years, would you have witnessed any trades that have risen in or have come from being blue collar jobs to now being in demand and have risen in social value?
I think there are lots of them which are changing in terms of. So if you look at even in the I guess it's the power of IT and how we use it can make that difference. So for example, even in the plumbing sector, the typical concept of plumber and the potential of getting a really qualified plumber, you have both of it now. So we have, for example, recently we launched a there's a app where you can get a good plumber. That plumber would be of a different quality. So it's a question of the quality of service that the person provides, how much skilling have they got. So even if you look at the driver's job, I mean, if you look at a change in perception of Ola and Uber driver compared to, there have been people who have done their MBA and have driven Ola and Uber. And if you go abroad, you find plenty of such people. I mean, who part-time say that, okay, today is Sunday, I've got my car, I'll be an Ola driver. So, or Uber driver, there is no Ola outside. But so I think there is a change in, many of these things. Some occurs also because of, like for example, if you take welding. Now, underground welding is a very sophisticated job. So somebody who does underwater welding is, usually is one of the highest paid person in terms of money. There would be just maybe 10 or 20 of them in India. There would not be many. And they are high in demand globally. So therefore there are trades which if people knew that you are a welder, all that you need to do is become an underwater welder and you actually end up earning hugely. That itself is a very powerful information and you could make use of that. So changes are occurring, but I think social changes takes time.
How many countries have specific demands and they come to NSDC and you are working with several countries? So can you just share some of these?
Yeah, sure. So I think there has been a lot of interest about India's skilling program and how we do it with the help of training providers, with understanding of what is the demand in the market, etc. So some recent ones, for example, was a request from government of Morocco through our India's ambassador in Morocco, wanting that if we can share with them our know-how and help them strengthen their institutions. They also have various sectors in which they do training, and our team has visited them. Their team is coming in March. There is also this United Nations UNIVOC. We have been declared a UNIVOC center in terms of United Nations Vocational Center, Vocational Education Center. Globally, there would be about 25-30. 4 of them are there in India. So we are one of them. And essentially saying that there is enough knowledge here to share globally in terms of best practices. There has also been a request from the World Bank in Beirut, where they want to rehabilitate a lot of people who are displaced from Syrian war, from Iraq war and all that. So they want to skill them and they want to get them back to normal life. So they want to look at Indian example and see what they could learn from us, that they could teach people there so that they stabilize. There has been also a request from us, from Japan, government of Japan, wanting people from India for specific sectors.
So coming back to the question of the employment numbers, you said there might be some people who are still in education and they claim they're unemployed. But at the same time, there are a lot of people who have finished their education, who are graduates, postgraduates, and they are employed as delivery boys or like jobs that do not match their skill. You say there are enough jobs probably, but is this mass unemployment or underemployment not an issue as well?
This is, absolutely. So I think this is what we need to address. And here, perhaps the solution doesn't lie in purely creating jobs, but creating entrepreneurial opportunity. A country like India, we need to basically unleash the power of entrepreneurial capacity of the youths. And that essentially means, I think, lot of imaginative funding which is required from private sector, not so much from government. Government funding, I personally feel, has very low capacity for risk. It has very low capacity for risk. You cannot fail in anything in government, no? So, and entrepreneurship by nature, 70% will fail. And it's okay to fail as long as you have tried, you have done an honest job. 3 years you tried, you failed, that doesn't matter. You were honest in your effort, you should be given another loan so that you can try once more. Because even a person like Mr. Subrata Bakshi, who founded Mindtree, he was telling me that he failed thrice before he ended up creating Mindtree. So failure is normal in private sector. So therefore, I think how we create that opportunity for youths to get money, to become more entrepreneurial, that is a big, I think, challenge.